All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have 3 words for you. Freak show fights. Some people love them, some people hate them. But unfortunately, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. They have always been a part of combat sports, and they're not going to go anywhere anytime soon. Of course, just recently we see Jake Paul taking on washed up MMA fighters who haven't won for a while. We've got Tyson Fury talking about fighting Francis Ngannou, and all the way back to 1976 and before that, in 76 we had Muhammad Ali taking on Antonio Inoki, a boxer versus a wrestler, and it goes all the way back way before then. So whether you like it or not, freak show fights are going nowhere. Listen, there is a section of combat sport fans that just don't like them. They are purists and they want, the best fighting the best, and that's it. They don't want any deviation from that. And I understand that. I get that. But also, there is a fun factor with these kind of freak show fights. They have been around for a long time. And, listen, was it 2017? I think it was Conor McGregor taking on Floyd Mayweather. And that wasn't bad. Conor actually did a really good job, and then Floyd got him out of there eventually. Talking to Floyd Mayweather, he's back in action doing an exhibition match. He just had one recently against Logan Paul. That was forgettable. Now he's fighting on top of a helipad in Dubai against a motherfucking YouTuber. Okay, of course, there's way more examples than that. I could go on all day. Of course, recently we also had Roy Jones Jr. taking on Mike Tyson. 2 absolute legends. So it's not really a freak show fight, but still, those guys competing was, a little unusual. And then, of course, right now we got, as I said, Tyson Fury talking about fighting Francis Ngannou, Deontay Wilder. Fair play to Francis Ngannou. He's trying to get paid. He's trying to be a legend. He's trying to take out the biggest names possible. And who wouldn't want to do that? Because it does sound amazing. The world heavyweight UFC champion taking on the boxing heavyweight champion. I mean, wouldn't that be incredible? And I think it'd do tremendous business. However, listen, of course, in combat sports, we want to see the best fighting the best. That's partly why the UFC is so successful, because that's what you get all the time. And you would probably think that only now, in this era of clickbait and short attention spans and everybody staring at phones, would they tolerate this kind of freak show fights. But you're absolutely wrong. They've been around for a long time, as I said, so get ready, everyone, pay attention. And yet, you at the back of the classroom, pay attention, because the count is going to take you on a little history lesson. Combat sports have always featured freak show fights, okay? Reigning boxing heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Johnson, he was tapped out in 30 seconds by grappler Fred Marcuson in 1914. And there were dozens and dozens more boxing versus wrestling fights, events stacked with them in the next few decades, in fact. And former world heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey, he came out of retirement in 1940 to knock out a pro wrestler called Cowboy Luttrell. He knocked him through the ropes. Dempsey was 45 years old and hadn't fought in 13 years, but the fight sold out a massive baseball stadium in Atlanta. Also, judo Gene LeBell beat boxer Milo Savage in what people think was probably the world's first televised MMA fight in 1963. And of course, it isn't just boxing. The UFC itself started as a whole tournament of freak show fights. It really did. I mean, come on, think about it. Go back to 1993. It was judo versus wrestling versus karate versus sumo. No rules, even though there was some. No time limits. Hoist Gracie in a gi fighting boxer Art Jimmerson wearing one boxing glove. Right? They even thought about having the octagon fence electrified and maybe having the fight take place over a pit of live crocodiles. Yes, that is true. That is not bullshit. That is actually in the history books. And of course, the UFC, when you look at some of those early fights, they were kind of freak show fights, you know what I mean? But that's what captured the imagination. And of course, they were trying to prove the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu family, the Gracie family, they were trying to prove that their form of combat was the best. And then over time, it all developed into what we know now as mixed martial arts. And there is no one perfect style. And then, of course, who could forget about Pride FC, which was the number one MMA promotion from about 1997 to 2005. They put on some sensational fights. Let's think, we had Fedor Emelianenko taking on Nogueira, right? Those fights were sensational. They had Fedor and Cro Cop. They had Rampage Jackson. They had Shogun Rua when he went on that sensational run in 2004. And, of course, they had Vanderlei Silva on enough steroids to give a Tyrannosaurus Rex a heart attack. So they had some tremendous fights. fights, okay? But also, they had tons of freak show fights, okay? Let's not forget about Don Fry when he took on Yoshihiro Takayama. Remember that fight? They're both in the corner and they're just smashing the hell out of one another. That was absolutely, it was ridiculous, but it was awesome at the same time. They had Zulozinho, they had Mirko Cro Cop taking on Dos Caras Jr. He was the Mexican wrestler who came in with like the Mexican mask on, and he gets head kicked and knocked out cold. I'm not surprised, because one would assume that those wrestling masks would obscure your vision just a little bit. So as I say, freak show fights, once again, they have been a part of history of combat sports for quite some time. But you know what? It wasn't just the Japanese that enjoyed these crazy freak show fights, because we've even had them in the UFC. I mean, listen, when Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta took over the UFC, they legitimized it and turned it into the amazing sport which we see today. But back in the day, it wasn't like that, as we know. They brought in rounds, time limits, rules, weight classes. The list goes on, okay? They brought in the gloves, etc., etc. But there were still a few little freak show fights and a few spectacles along the way, because it's a little bit of fun. And there's a few experiments along the way as well. Remember Brock Lesnar? Not that I'm calling him an experiment. He's a very big man. But Brock Lesnar, he was brought over. Yes, of course, he was a great NCAA wrestler, but he was also a gigantic human being that was a tremendous star from the WWE. And he came over and he did sensational things. In fact, he even became the UFC heavyweight champion of the world when he knocked out Randy Couture. And speaking of Randy Couture, who could forget that fight that he had against James Toney, right? James Toney, a legendary boxer, came over to the UFC, fought Randy Couture, and of course, Randy fought the smart fight. Ankle picked him, took him down, and finished him on the ground. I believe it was a submission. I can't remember exactly which one now. But yeah, ankle picked him to a submission. So that's why you see now all these boxers, they'll always call for the UFC fighter or the mixed martial arts to fight them in their sport, because the writing's already on the wall. If you fight them in a boxing ring, they've got a really good chance of winning. If you fight them in a cage, they're kind of screwed. In a boxing ring, a mixed martial arts only has probably 20% of his skill set, whereas the boxer, they've got everything. Think about it. The MMA guy, he's in the gym, he's working on his takedown defense, he's working on his jiu-jitsu, he's working on his wrestling, his kicks, his elbows, his knees, all the rest of it. Whereas the boxer, all he is doing is working on his footwork, working on his attacks, working on his head movement, all the things that you need to become a great boxer. There is no deviation from that. Whereas a mixed martial arts, of course, many, many different skills to consider. But listen, it wasn't just Brock Lesnar. What else did we have on Randy Couture? I mean, come on, freak show fights have been around for a long, long time. And don't be ashamed of it. We all love it. Listen, fighting is primal. It is feeling. It isn't thinking. You don't have to break it down too much. You just have to stand there and watch and enjoy the spectacle that is before you. I mean, come on, who doesn't want to see Francis Ngannou taking on Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder? Because it just sounds fucking awesome. And I, for one, I would pay to see that. So, in conclusion, freak show fights, they're going nowhere, okay? You don't have to watch them. You don't have to like them. You don't have to pay for them. But they are going nowhere, because they have been a part of the DNA of combat sports for a long, long time. And partly because they're pretty fucking awesome. So thank you for watching, of course. But just listen, I need your help. I am doing a video on the best mixed martial arts heavyweights of all time, and I need your help in voting, because there's so many great names. I mean, who are we talking? Is it Stipe Miocic? Is it Brock Lesnar, as I just mentioned? Is it Daniel Cormier? Go to the community section on my page and please do me a favor and vote for who you think was the best heavyweight of all time. And once again, thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.